My guest today is someone I have known for many years. Tom Freston is a principal of Firefly 3, an investment and consultancy firm focusing on the media and entertainment industries. He is the former CEO of Viacom, where he also served as chief operating officer. He is board chairman of the One Campaign, an advocacy organization to fight extreme poverty, and serves on the boards of Imagine Entertainment, Moby Media in Afghanistan, Vice Media in New York, and New America. Freston lived in Kabul in the 70s when he was in the clothing business. And then after the fall of the Taliban in 2001, would visit Afghanistan on the average of 3 times a year, sometimes 2 months at a time. And in my relationship, my friendship with Tom, I have heard him enthuse about Afghanistan, talk so lovingly about the country for many years. I, of course, thought about Tom during the recent events there, and he was one of the people I most wanted to hear from. Tom, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here.
It's nice to be with you, Marianne.
So first of all, tell us a little bit about your story. It started all the way back in the 1970s. How did your love affair with Afghanistan begin?
Well, I was working in the 70s. I was working in an ad agency in Manhattan, and I was sort of just an alienated young man. It was a part of the Nixon administration, war. And at one point, they were going to assign me to the Charmin toilet paper account, which was a little too much for me. So an ex-girlfriend called me from Paris and said, you can't do that. Why don't you come with me and go across the Sahara Desert? So I got a passport. I was on a plane like 10 days later, and we split up after a couple of months. But I kept going and ended up in Afghanistan. I went overland from Turkey. In those days, you could easily do that, go through Iran and cross the Afghanistan border in Tehran, in Herat. And from the first moments I was there, I felt I had entered some kind of magical land that I had been looking for. I was looking to get as far away from New York as I possibly could, and this seemed to be that. It was exotic, enchanting, and people were friendly. I was going through some stuff the other day, Marianne, and I get out an old tourist brochure from Afghanistan in those days. They hardly had any tourists, but on the tourist brochure, it would say, "See Afghanistan and visit the world's friendliest people," which would be about the last thing that would come to mind to anybody these days. But I found I developed this deep connection with the Afghans. I thought they were humble, hospitable, friendly, and you never ever worried about your personal safety. In fact, when I told them I lived in New York City, they would say back in the 70s, they were afraid to come to New York City because they thought New York was this big violent place. So it was sort of a magic time, and I ended up living in Kabul. I started a business. I wanted to live there, and no one would hire me, so I figured I'd start my own business. So I started a business making clothing. We'd import fabrics from Russia. I employed designers. We set up showrooms. I set up a parallel business in India as well. Got a house, and we would design and export clothing and sell it to like Bloomingdale's and sort of better stores. It wasn't the ethnic stuff, but it was, for me, it was just how could I support myself and live there? And in those years, I traveled pretty much all over the country. There was not a province I didn't go to. I was able to walk on the heads of those statues in Bamiyan that the Taliban blew up in 2001. So my love affair started over 40 years ago, but I left in 1978 when they had a coup that sort of brought in a communist party. And it's been a succession of wars ever since then. That country has been at war since 1978, if you can imagine. It's like a medieval concept.
So after the Taliban was toppled in 2001, you wanted to go back?
Well, I had followed it all those years. It was sort of blacked out. I would read everything I could, buy every book I could find. And when I left, I was working at MTV Networks, and this girl tracked me down right after the Taliban fell and said, I just went back to Kabul. She was a Persian girl who grew up in the States. Family was from Tehran. And she said, I want to start a clothing company. And I heard you did that in the 70s, and I want to compare notes. So I said, wow, this is fantastic. Someone actually from Afghanistan who's been there. So we went out and had a lunch, and I introduced her to I rounded up my old designer, and we had a great lunch. And then she said, and you got to meet my boyfriend. He's the Rupert Murdoch of Afghanistan. I had to laugh at that. I go, you got to be kidding me. So he showed up a couple of weeks later. His name's Saad Massini, and he effectively started the first media outlets in Afghanistan, and we became dear friends. He started a first radio station. That was the first thing. They borrowed $250,000 from the U.S. government, which they repaid, and started a radio station with morning shows and jingles and playing Afghan music, which had all been banned under the Taliban. It like lit up the country. It was just a phenomena. People were just so dying to be connected with music and to each other. And then they said, hey, why don't we start a television network? And they got a license to do that. And I left Viacom, and he called me up. This was in 2006. He said, why don't you come? Come back to Kabul. You love it. And help me train people to run a television network, because obviously we don't have a pool of any experienced television executives, because television had been illegal under the Taliban. And there really was very little television before the Taliban ever showed up to begin with. So it was just exhilarating to be working in sort of a modern Afghan environment, men and women working side by side. I would bring in some expats that I knew, and we would get them up to speed. And I was attracted to it because it's probably the best force for social change in that country, in terms of communicating gender equality, having a male and a female newsreader, having shows about the importance of education, various aspirational kinds of programs. So I would be there, and I went on his board, and I took up residence in Kabul for months at a time, and it was really quite rewarding. They became the powerhouse of Afghan media, which is a underreported story, because there's one thing that's been successful there. It has been independent media. It's got actually the freest independent media of any country in the region, including Turkey and India. That all now, of course, could be gone in the blink of an eye, and is fading fast.
In an article in the New York Times in 2011, you said, every time I go there are kids doing a bunch of new things, making all kinds of interesting programming. The work they're coming up with is remarkable. And you talk in that same article about the millions of people who would be watching the Afghani sitcoms, the equivalent of American Idol for Afghanistan, and what an extraordinary force this was in people's lives. Are you in touch with many people that you knew then, Tom? Do you know if people that you were working with in these news outlets got out, people who were working in these radio stations or television stations?
Yeah, the last few weeks, I've been in touch with so many of them and working with Saad and trying to get people out. We just got 13 female journalists flew off to Albania. We've got people who went up to Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, gone to Qatar. I think in total, maybe 150 people out of 600 have been able to get out of the country. The network's still up and running. The Taliban came by to see us. I mean, I wasn't there. They came by the first day. They were in Kabul. And they wanted to look around, and they wanted to take away our weapons, the weapons that have been supplied by the state for our security, because we were heavily fortified. Mind you, the Taliban had attacked with a truck bomb and killed 13 of our people just, 2 years earlier. But now they came around and wanted to know if they could provide us protection. And they let us keep half of our weapons. And then they had one of their, I wouldn't say minister yet, but they had a high up Taliban fellow come in and be interviewed by one of our female journalists, who has since herself left the country. So, they're sending signals that they're going to be more inclusive and liberal, but I think it's hard for the Taliban to, be true to themselves. They're religious extremists. I don't see a great future for media in Afghanistan.
Let's go back a little bit to the Afghan people. You speak about them now, and I've heard you speak about them throughout the years in such enthusiastic terms. You talked before about their being friendly. You talked about the young people being creative. Obviously, the catastrophic ending to this war made it very clear that too many powerful people who were involved in the war planning, for instance, did not know the Afghan people. There was a disconnect between the war effort and a real understanding of Afghan culture. I think now there's an interest and a curiosity on the part of many of us. What is it about the Afghan people that you most want us to know?
Well, the fact that we didn't understand them, and that's nothing new. We didn't understand the Vietnamese either.
That's
We're quite
exactly
open
right.
about that. You know, we would send people there for a year at a time. So if they were ever learning anything, that really wasn't much. They would be replaced by new people. I would find, though, because I would meet a lot of the military people. Mind you, I had nothing to do with the military or the U.S. government. But I would find that the Afghans who stuck around, I mean, the Americans who stuck around in the military, they too developed this affinity for the Afghans. They found them charming, they found them hilarious, and they're very engaging people. And when I first went there, there was a real excitement in the 70s that they were going to finally join the modern world. Kabul was only 400,000 people, and it was part of it looked like some old medieval city, but it's now 5 million. And I've seen these planes leaving the airport now, and there's like going by all these look like condo buildings. I mean, it's a remarkable changes have happened in the landscape there. But the people were excited to be part and connected to the modern world. You'd see women in miniskirts in Kabul in the 1970s. And there was also, you know, National Women's Week. They would have a lot of events for women. That all, of course, went away with the wars. I mean, once you got out of Kabul, it was still quite a conservative country. And I'd say it had a sort of a Sufi vibe. It wasn't the harsh Islamic strain that the Taliban practices sort of infected Afghanistan in the 80s during the Soviet war, because the Americans, as we know, supplied weapons to the Mujahideen. There was like 7 groups of them. And the Saudis matched that dollar for dollar, you know, with more weapons and cash. And then they set up these madrasas in the refugee camps in Pakistan. And all of a sudden, the Wahhabi brand of Islam, the same brand of Islam that Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda follow. So they really infected the country like a virus. There used to be Sikh and Hindu communities and even some Christians in Afghanistan. They've all been driven out. So when I returned, it was a much harsher place. But if you scratch deep down, the Afghans, you know, you still could get a smile out of them, and they would, despite their misfortune, would still be charming and could find, you know, good things. Now, the average age of the country is 18. So there's a whole generation now that's grown up in relative freedom, imperfect as it was, but that's just been taken away in a flash. I got an email today from a fellow who was the head of programming at Talo TV, and he was the first guy to be a DJ on the radio station that preceded it. And he, as a kid, had worked for the Taliban because they hired him to be a newsreader. So he was the only guy we could find in the country who had any experience in radio that's why they hired him. But now he's in Turkey, and he made it out with his family. And he's applied for a U.S. visa, and he's asked me for some help. And so we had some healthy back and forth today. But, you know, you could just, you know, they left everything behind. I mean, you'd see these kids going on these planes. I mean, everyone has like a suitcase or a backpack. I mean, they don't even have a suitcase. So this is a guy who's pretty much left everything, but happy to be gone. He wasn't ready for a second run at the Taliban.
Tell us about some of the television shows that you were involved with. They were sitcoms. They were spin-offs of some of the shows that we know here. What kinds of entertainment did the Afghan people like?
When we started, there was no library of any existing programming in Pashto or Dari, so we would dub like Turkish soap operas, Indian soap operas, which they loved. They would name their children after some of the stars. They had never seen anything like this. And they pick up all these social cues about how to decorate your house or, you know, cleanliness. That was simple stuff. And then we got into music programming, which of course was simple. And in my background with MTV, I was all for that. I mean, they have a great musical tradition there, both popular music and
Yes.
classical Afghan music. But it was
Yes.
illegal to play. It's already illegal now. We've had to take all our music off the air. We're still
Yes.
broadcasting.
Yes.
But
And
we
they
did
killed the
Afghan
pup.
Star, which was sort of a knockoff of American Idol. It would get more votes than the national election for president. I mean, people would text in their votes. So it was a huge event, like it would be the Super Bowl, playing the Super Bowl in Afghanistan. And you would find these people, they would be doing everything from sort of classical Pashtun music to Afghan hip hop or heavy metal. I mean, there was all variants of music. Um, the big thing, though, was news. If you live in a war zone, you like news. So we started a very, very credible news operation and would interview any major person coming through town. And we would call out corruption and, bad things. Karzai would be on. That would be a number one slot. It was like the top network in the country. So news took up a large part of the schedule.
We have already heard reports of assassinations by the Taliban of one well-known comic and also one well-known pop singer.
Yeah.
You
So
mentioned how the majority of the population in Afghanistan is under 18 years old and did not know life under the Taliban before. You can't know, of course, but what do you feel intuitively is going to happen now? What will be the reaction of these people, of the people that you knew? What is your sense of how they will go through this experience?
it's horrific. I mean, one thing, study after study that happened in the last 20 years that would be done by Asia Foundation or others would find that the support for the Taliban was like 15%. That was their approval rating. The problem was the government had a lower approval rating. One could say that if they had a government that wasn't as corrupt and as predatory as the one they set up, that the Taliban never would have made these inroads. There's almost like the Afghan government was the Taliban's best friend. But how
Well,
do
Tom,
they feel like their life is closed? I'm involved also with the American University of Afghanistan, and I've had this harrowing thing trying to get these girls out of there and pleading, trying to get them on planes. And the last thing, we had 20 buses of them on the last Sunday, a couple of days before they closed the airport down. And there was a fixer. It was lined up. They were going to go out. Qatar was going to receive them. We were going to set up the university in exile. But they closed the airport down, and they've all gone back. They were told before this to burn all their books, to burn any correspondence they had with the American University.
I read an article about that. I think it was probably in the New York Times, and how they waited in their buses for 7 hours, and the reaction among them when they were told, sorry, the evacuations won't occur. When you said it could be said that if the Afghan government had not been so corrupt, then perhaps the Taliban would not have had the success they had. Many people are saying that now, and I think it's becoming very, very clear the role of the corruption of the government, what that played in this drama, and also the role of the United States in enabling that government and supporting them.
Well, we didn't just enable it. We formed a government there that was unlike any government they'd had in the past. It was a federal. They had people always say Afghanistan's always at war. No, that's not true. From the 40s to the 70s, through the 70s, it was at peace. But they had there was tribal, and everybody had some autonomy. We set up a centralized state that would where the president would get to appoint the governors in each province, rather than the people in the province electing their own leaders, which is just made things rife for corruption. And we picked and sided with the warlords and the sort of power brokers who had ransacked the country, that almost led to the Taliban in the first place. So we aligned with the wrong people, set up the wrong kind of constitution, and then we laid this heavy military footprint in place. And, they'll be writing a lot of books about it.
So many people are saying that right now. The article by Sarah Chase, I don't know if you ever knew her, her article, The Ides of August, that what you just said is what everybody is saying now. The warlords were just a little bit better than the Taliban, and in some cases even worse. And just the hubris, the arrogance, the complete lack of humanitarian values and lack of democracy that the United States demonstrated in the way our government handled the war and handled our being there. Now that it is what it is, I think so much of what you just described about the students at American University who couldn't get out, there is so much anger among so many people, myself included, about the way the exit was handled, including their failure to prioritize women who clearly would be among the most vulnerable. Why do you think that, it seems to me that the lack of concern, the lack of respect for the people that we demonstrated throughout the war was demonstrated in the way we exited. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was like trying to get into some nightclub. This was like trying to get out of a country. It's who you're connected to. There was no rhyme or reason. I made a case that I had heard that lists had come down from the White House about who's going to be the last people to be able to get taken out on military aircraft, and these girls were not included. And I said, why aren't they included, for God's sake? It's the American University. They are on scholarships from the American Embassy in Kabul. They're not on any kill list. We're looking to get out women activists and others who we know are in more danger, and we only have a limited amount of spaces. I mean, that's what I got from that, when in fact, I said, well, these girls, their futures are over. You're killing their futures, but it doesn't seem to ring a bell. I mean, the whole... Oh, don't get me going. It's the whole way this thing has been done, Marianne, has just been, it's one mistake after another, and no concern, no preparation. Once again, bad intelligence. These are the same people who told us that Saddam Hussein had WMD. We spent $2 trillion. And this 9/11 on the 20th anniversary, they'll probably be flying a Taliban flag over the American Embassy, which is, I think, one of the biggest ones in the world, a big folly.
What's going to happen now?
Well, the Taliban's not going to go over well. So unless they decide to do some new card tricks and be really inclusive and bring in people from other sectors of the society, it's going to be another civil war. Some people would say the best case is a civil war. There'll be resistance. People, there's a generation now different from in the 90s when they first came in, when they were already, Afghanistan was pretty cut off from the war and world and ravaged by war. These people have Facebook and Twitter, and they've been, they have social media, and they're used to being connected to the outside world. They've had freedoms. They can go into coffee shops like their versions of Starbucks and so forth. That's all over. They're not going to just say, okay, I'm going to go with this new program and pray 5 times a day and just give up music, give up movies, give up, the way I want to dress, give up my aspirations. So there will be a reaction. And how that takes place, it's yet to be seen. When the communists took over in 1978, that was a big shock to the system. And for a few months, everything kind of, everybody was just in a state of shock. But gradually, leaders emerged and resistance started, and these Mujahideen groups began to tried to overthrow the communist regime, and that's when the Russians invaded. And then it just went worse from there. So, action, reaction. The Afghans aren't going to take this sitting down. They've had a good taste of freedom despite all the faults that this invasion by us brought. They have tasted it, and they have higher aspirations for themselves than being, shuttled around by these medieval guys with automatic weapons.
How has this experience changed you? I mean, you can't be the same person after having gone through all this. What do you think, what's true for you now, and how will your life be different going forward?
Well, my life changed the first day I ever stepped foot in Afghanistan. I'll say that. Because I saw then a different path for myself, and I played it out. And I found a fascination with that part of the world, and it has greatly enriched me. So that was a big break point for me. That was in 1972. And I don't know, Marianne, I just find it so tremendously disappointing. I mean, heartbreaking, you know. It's, you know, it was like Kabul, I was sort of a city on some kind of binge, and it kind of just went off the rails and went back 25 years or went back several centuries. It's hard to imagine that all the things you worked on and built and I didn't do so much, but the Afghans did, and apart from the government, it just goes away it can go away so quickly. I still have faith in them, and I do believe that there will be a way that there will be a reaction to this. I guess I haven't had that much time for reflection. I'm sort of just moving forward with what can we do to kind of make this bad situation better. I don't think that this is the end of the story. It has been a series of wars from, they use that term, the Forever War, which was the title of Dexter Filkin's book. And I don't know, this is not going to end. There will be more trouble. You can see resistance already building in some of the outer provinces. There's the Panjshir province where a lot of these soldiers who didn't surrender have gone now. I think what they're going to struggle with is who's going to be providing them weapons and so forth. But Afghans they have a lot of ingenuity.
Do you think that the Pakistanis were supplying the Taliban with arms throughout this?
I would say that the Taliban orchestrated this campaign. The Taliban, the Pakistanis have given sanctuary to the Taliban. They gave birth to the Taliban. They see the Taliban as sort of providing what they call strategic depth against India, on their northern border. They don't want to see Afghanistan going the way of, they don't want to see part of their Pashtun areas being hacked away like what happened with Bangladesh, which was once East Pakistan. But they have cheered the Taliban on. I read a story that on the day that Kabul fell, the NDS, which is the equivalent of the Afghan CIA, essentially, right away, the Pakistanis entered there and took out all their computers and all their files with all their agents and all their contacts, which nobody even thought to destroy. So, yeah, Pakistan has been in up to their neck on this, and they're very happy. You could say that Pakistan is the winner of this war. And they did it while accepting American money all these years and playing us, and we never stood up to them.
It's a very good chance that there were American soldiers who were killed by weapons supplied by the United States to Pakistan, which were then supplied to the Taliban.
Yeah, well, count on that. Yeah. But they really gave the Taliban a lot of great military advice. I mean, one would say that their campaign, as soon as Trump made that deal, the Taliban went in and cut deals with all these provincial leaders saying, look, the Americans are leaving. Your government is not worth it. We're going to win. We're stronger than ever. So when we come around, just surrender without a shot. And that's essentially what happened. It was a really well-run, like guerrilla medieval blitzkrieg.
Do you have an opinion why Trump made such a quote-unquote bad deal and why Biden adhered to it the way he did?
Trump just wanted to get out of there, saw no value to the place. He's been quoted saying the worst things about Afghanistan. I think, let's face it, most of the American people were tired of this. I do think myself that the continuation of the war, the way it was structured, was just untenable.
Ridiculous.
Trump wanted to show himself as a big deal maker. To the last week of his presidency, he wanted to pull everybody out, and the military slow-walked that. Biden was the only guy really, like in 2009 when they were talking about this surge thing, he was the dissenter. He's never been a fan of Afghanistan. He famously walked out on a big dinner with Hamid Karzai, pounded on the table, and left. He has, and it's been interesting watching him defending his decision so boldly. I mean, he believes this to his core. And I don't know that the Republicans are used to a Democrat who doesn't apologize for anything.
We needed to leave. But the way we left, Tom, that's what I don't understand. I understand Biden defending this decision to leave. We were probably there 17, 18 years too long. But how could we have executed an exit so lacking in wisdom and strategy, in excellence, and in
Hubris.
humanitarian concern? Hubris.
Let's take our soldiers out before we take out any of the people who helped us, before we take out any of the American citizens who are doing work there. I mean, we just use people up and throw them away. I mean, it was unconscionable. Take out the soldiers first. I mean, there were so many other ways to do this, Marianne.
Well, God forgive us.
I hope.
Well, Tom, I thank you. I know this must be a difficult time for you, you know, all the years that I've known you. Your enthusiasm, your excitement about Afghanistan, about Kabul, the way you would describe the nightlife in Kabul.
Oh
I've
yeah,
heard
it
you
was
talk about
quite
it.
a, they
Yeah.
had quite a time there for a while.
Yeah, yeah.
They
And
call that the
so,
Kabul bubble.
as we were going through all this, I kept thinking about you and remembering the things that you said. I know for you and for people like you, this must be a particularly difficult time. It's a shameful time for all of us. The more we know, the more we hear, the more we realize. But I know for someone like yourself with so many personal relationships there, it must be particularly difficult. But I agree with you, even just the level of things on which someone like myself can understand them, it seems very clear this story is not over, and I doubt that it's over for you either. So thank you. Thank you
No.
for sharing these stories, sharing these reminiscences. Is there anything else that you think that you want people to know?
Well, I mean, I've spent today talking to different groups of people who I know from the not-for-profit world, people who are in the military, people who were in the Peace Corps years ago, former diplomats, and how people who ran ad agencies in Afghanistan, if you can imagine such a thing, how they all, and they were conservative and liberal, they have bonded together and figured out how to get friends out. I mean, it was like this last plane out of Kabul, and there's still things underway, and I'm just amazed at the great feelings that everybody shares about the Afghans. Yeah.
I know that
They deserve better.
you took us right into our heart about it. And I think the more we feel the deep human tragedy of all this, the closer we will come to the wisdom that we need. As you said, this has just been a repetition of the catastrophe in Vietnam in so many ways. And hopefully we will allow ourselves to feel this, to really be impacted by this enough to become smarter, more intelligent, wiser, so that we don't repeat these kinds of things. And that's why stories from people like yourself who were there, who are feeling it now, these are so important that people hear these stories. And I really thank you for sharing them with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marianne. Nice to see you.
All my best to you.
Okay.
God bless you.
Bye-bye.